The other thing that has happened in response to the Paris attacks is that 31 Republican, mostly Republican, U.S. governors have said, we are not going to take in Syrian refugees, period. Chris Christie went as far as saying that Syrian orphans under age 5 don't belong here. Jeb Bush and Ted Cruz have both suggested we just admit Christian refugees. This is obviously a combination of dumb and dangerous and against the law. We have the Immigration Act that is in place and prevents states from violating federal immigration policy. These Republican governors don't care, doesn't matter. A couple interesting articles have been written over the last 2 days reminding us that Anne Frank was a refugee who was denied entrance to the United States. According to documents discovered a few years ago, Anne Frank's father, and of course Anne Frank and the Frank family, Otto Frank, etc., hid in an attic that I visited in Amsterdam last year. During World War II, they were Jewish. They were ultimately found. They were ultimately killed. It was all to try to avoid being sent to concentration camps during the Holocaust. It's been uncovered that Anne Frank's father wrote numerous letters to U.S. officials pleading for permission to immigrate with his family. Most of these were written between April and December of 1941, in the months following the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands, where they had been exiled. And at the end of 1941, after the family was pleading and getting ignored, the Franks ultimately went into hiding until they were discovered and sent to Auschwitz. And in 1945, Anne and her sister Margot died of typhus in the Bergen-Belsen concentration camps. People are generally familiar with the story of Anne Frank, but there is not as much discussion of why they were not allowed refugee status here in the United States. And the reason was that after World War I, Congress passed the Immigration Restriction Act of 1924, which set up a quota system that discouraged the immigration of Jews, Italians, and other undesirables. People ask me, Lewis, David, your family, Eastern European Jews, left Europe to Argentina. Why Argentina instead of coming to the U.S.? There were immigration quotas for Jews. Those had been used up, so my family ended up in Argentina. Why do so many Italians? Why is Argentinian culture so Italian? Same reason. There were quotas for Italian immigrants to the United States. Italians ended up in Argentina. What can we learn from all this? It's not about Anne Frank specifically, necessarily, but it is to remind us that when we start talking about religion-based immigration and refugee status, when we start talking about keeping people out merely based on country of origin or merely based on self-professed beliefs, we are opening ourselves up to the same type of policy that led to Anne Frank. Anne Frank, certainly no risk to anybody, staying in the Netherlands, ultimately being sent to a concentration camp and dying. That is the direct connection.
Yeah, and is there any doubt in your mind that we have a Congress full of people who would love to pass similar legislation right now? I mean, I think that
there's no doubt at all.
I mean, it probably won't happen, but any bill that lands on the president's desk, of course, like that, will be vetoed. But who will the next president be, Dave? I mean, anything can happen here.
Anything can happen. Absolutely. And some people online, I was reading comments online about this Anne Frank stuff saying, well, if that had happened, we wouldn't have Anne Frank's diary, which has now been sort of, I mean, what can you say? It is just an institution that talks to us about World War II and the Holocaust. We wouldn't have that.
Yeah, but we have plenty of information about World War II and the countless people that suffered the same fate.
It's a very weird thing to say. I mean, if Elie Wiesel had never been in a concentration camp, we wouldn't have his book Night, one of the most important personal descriptions of the Holocaust, a huge literary contribution. For every great book that has come out of tragedy or out of Holocaust death, there were thousands and thousands of people who died for no reason, who never wrote a book, etc. And the idea that, well, if that had happened, we would have lost a great contribution to literature. We'll still have plenty of great contributions to literature if we could prevent people from dying.
Contributions to anything.
Sure.
What might Anne Frank have done? Perhaps she would have been some famous scientist who discovered something incredible. The what ifs, it's not good to play the what if game.
When you reflexively jump to closing borders, choosing refugees based on religion, just remember the story of Anne Frank and her family. Send us email about this, davidpakman.com. Click on Contact Us. Send us an email. Disagree, agree. We'll take a break and be back after this.